I gave that company 30 solid years of my life, working with all my heart and effort devoted to every project. No one handled more projects than I did. But when my boss called me into his office that Friday afternoon, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Eleanor, you're getting older. You just don't have the stamina anymore." 3 weeks later, he watched in disbelief as every key member of my department walked out behind me. If you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button. If you're returning, thank you for your support. Today's story reveals how age discrimination became the catalyst for one of the most remarkable second acts in corporate America. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Anderson Financial Group headquarters dominated the Minneapolis skyline, its glass exterior reflecting clouds and blue sky on that crisp October morning. I'd watched that building rise 30 years earlier, when Richard Anderson had just been a hungry entrepreneur with a vision of revolutionizing wealth management services for middle-class Americans. Back then, we operated out of a converted warehouse, with second-hand furniture and ambitious dreams. "Quarterly numbers are looking strong, Eleanor," said Marcus, sliding a report across my desk. At 34, he was our newest financial analyst, technically reporting to me but clearly being groomed for upper management. His expensive haircut and tailored suit broadcast his ambition more loudly than his words ever could. "These projections seem aggressive," I noted, flipping through the analysis. "The Hartman portfolio especially. There's considerable risk in this approach." Marcus's smile tightened at the edges. Richard specifically requested more aggressive growth strategies. The board wants to see double-digit returns across all major accounts. I removed my reading glasses, a gesture that had become habitual. In recent months, as the subtle power shifts within the company became increasingly obvious. Growth at what cost? The Hartmans are retiring in 3 years. They need stability more than aggressive returns. "Perhaps that's the issue," Marcus replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "The old approach isn't cutting it anymore." The emphasis on old wasn't subtle. Neither were the closed-door meetings that excluded me, or the key accounts gradually being reassigned to younger advisors, or Richard's increasingly infrequent visits to my department. After managing the company's largest client portfolio for almost 3 decades, I recognized the signs of imminent change. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. "Meeting with Richard, 2 p.m. No agenda, no additional participants. Just the kind of meeting that makes any long-term employee's stomach clench with apprehension. "Eleanor, you have a moment?" Diane peeked into my office, her expression carefully neutral. At 57, she was the closest to my age among the senior staff, having joined the firm 25 years earlier, when Richard's ambitions had begun to materialize into genuine success. I nodded, closing my laptop. "Richard wants to see me at 2. Diane closed the door behind her. "Have you seen the new organizational chart draft?" When I shook my head, she placed a printout on my desk, face down, and kept her hand on it. "This hasn't been officially distributed. Jessica from HR was updating it on her computer when I stopped by." I turned over the document and felt the blood drain from my face. The Client Services Division, my division, showed Marcus Davis as Division Director. My name appeared nowhere on the chart. "This could be preliminary," Diane offered, but her tone lacked conviction. "Or it could be exactly what it looks like," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the sudden hollow feeling in my chest. "They're restructuring me out." 30 years, Eleanor. Surely Richard wouldn't just... 30 years means nothing when the only metric that matters is quarterly growth. I straightened the papers on my desk, a pointless gesture but somehow grounding. The board has been pushing him hard since the Westlake acquisition fell through. Diane's face showed the calculation happening behind her eyes. "If they're doing this to you..." You should update your LinkedIn profile, I finished. For her? We exchanged grim smiles, the kind shared between soldiers who recognize an approaching battle. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of routine tasks performed on autopilot, client calls, report reviews, emails answered with professional detachment, all while my mind raced through scenarios, calculations, and contingencies. By the time I took the elevator to the executive floor, I had moved from shock to strategic thinking. Richard's assistant avoided eye contact as she announced my arrival. The subtle acknowledgement of what was coming made my spine stiffen with resolve. "Eleanor, come in." Richard stood behind his desk rather than coming around to greet me with his usual handshake. At 63, he was only 4 years my junior, but regular. Botox and a recent hair transplant maintained the illusion of a much younger man. His office, recently renovated in sleek grays and blues, projected contemporary power, erasing any trace of the passionate idealist I'd first met 3 decades ago. "I appreciate you making time," I said, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. Small assertions of equality mattered in moments like these. Richard remained standing. "Eleanor, you've been with Anderson Financial since the beginning. No one understands what we've built better than you do." The past tense wasn't lost on me. I remained silent, waiting. The industry is evolving rapidly. Our client base is getting younger. Investment approaches that worked 5 years ago are becoming obsolete. He finally sat, leaning forward with practiced sincerity. "The board is pushing for significant changes in our service delivery model. I've consistently exceeded growth targets for my division," I stated flatly. "The Brentwood acquisition last quarter added $16 million to our managed assets. Nobody's questioning your contributions." He slid a folder across the desk. "This is a very generous separation package. 2-month salary for every year of service. Extended health benefits. A consulting retainer for the transition period." I didn't touch the folder. "This isn't about performance, is it?" Richard sighed, suddenly looking every day of his 63 years. "Eleanor, we've known each other too long for games. The market perception matters. Clients want advisors who reflect where they're going, not where they've been. Marcus brings an energy and approach that resonates with younger investors." "You mean he looks the part," I translated, "while I look obsolete." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "That's not what It's exactly what you mean," I interrupted, surprising us both with my directness. "Eleanor, you're getting older. You just don't have the stamina anymore." I quoted his unspoken thoughts back to him. Richard had the decency to flush slightly. "The package is more than fair. You could retire early, travel, enjoy life outside these walls. When was the last time you took an actual vacation?" The question struck deeper than he likely intended. My dedication to Anderson Financial had cost me a marriage, countless weekends, and the leisure time others took for granted. I had believed I was building something lasting, a legacy of financial security for thousands of families who trusted our guidance. "When do you want me gone?" I asked, businesslike, reaching for the folder. "Today would be best," he replied, relief evident in his voice. "HR has prepared a communication to the team. Marcus will step in effective Monday morning." "And my clients?" I looked him directly in the eyes, the question serving as both challenge and test of character. Richard looked away first. "We'll distribute your portfolio among the senior advisors. Jessica has prepared a transition document." Of course she has," I said quietly, standing and gathering my dignity along with the termination folder. 30 years, Richard. I helped you build this company when no one else believed in your vision. I brought in half the clients that formed our foundation. I trained most of the senior staff. And you'll be compensated fairly for all of it," he replied, his tone suggesting the conversation had reached its conclusion. He extended his hand. I wish you nothing but the best, Eleanor. I looked at his outstretched hand, the same hand I had shaken when we closed our first major client, when we moved into our first real office, when we celebrated breaking 8 figures in managed assets. The same hand that was now signing off on reducing 3 decades of dedication to a severance calculation. I did not take it. Goodbye, Richard. The walk back to my office felt surreal, like moving through a building I had never seen before, though I had occupied it for 17 years. Faces turned away as I passed, word having spread with the unnatural speed that only bad news achieves. In corporate environments, Diane waited by my office door, her expression confirming she already knew. My office, 5 minutes, she whispered as I passed. Bring nothing that would suggest you're leaving. I nodded slightly, then closed my door and leaned against it, allowing myself exactly 30 seconds to feel the full weight of what had just happened. 30 seconds to process the anger, the humiliation, the profound sense of betrayal. Then I straightened my shoulders, opened my eyes, and became strategic Eleanor again. If this was my last day at Anderson Financial Group, I would leave on my terms, not Richard's. Diane's office was a stark contrast to the minimalist corporate aesthetic that dominated Anderson Financial Group's headquarters. Family photos lined her desk, potted plants thrived on every available surface, and the wall featured framed thank you letters from clients whose financial futures she had helped secure. She had created a space that felt human in a building designed to emphasize institutional power. Close the door, she instructed as I entered. 4 other people were already seated in a tight semicircle. James from Tax Services, Meredith from Estate Planning, Raymond from Client Acquisition, and Catherine from Investment Analysis. All senior staff, all over 50, all fixtures at the company for at least 15 years. Their clearinghouse, James said without preamble, his normally genial face hardened with anger. HR has meetings scheduled with each of us over the next 2 weeks. I took the last empty chair. How did you find out? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jessica's assistant, Catherine replied. She's been preparing severance packages for everyone in this room. The poor girl is dating my nephew. She felt awful keeping it from me. Richard just told me I lack the stamina for the job I've been excelling at for 3 decades, I said, the words still stinging as I spoke them. Apparently, Marcus will be taking over my division effective Monday. Raymond snorted. Marcus couldn't manage a coffee order without detailed instructions, let alone a client portfolio. This is about Richard's nephew-in-law. What? The so? Question came from all of us simultaneously. You haven't met Bradley Carson? Raymond's eyebrows rose. 32, MBA from Wharton, married to Richard's niece Stephanie last year. Started as a strategic consultant 3 months ago. Word is he's being groomed for COO. The pieces clicked into place. Richard's increasing absence, the influx of young hires with impressive degrees but minimal experience, the emphasis on fresh approaches in recent management meetings. It's a family takeover, Meredith concluded, voicing what we were all thinking. They're pushing us out to make room for Richard's extended family and their connections. What are we going to do? Catherine asked, her fingers nervously twisting her pearl necklace. I'm 57. Who's going to hire me at this level? The question hung heavily in the air. Age discrimination was real, particularly in financial services where youth was increasingly equated with innovation. Despite laws against it, companies found ways to push out older employees, usually with carefully worded explanations about changing directions and fresh perspectives. I have an idea, I said slowly, an unexpected clarity emerging from the chaos of the day. But it would require all of us to take a significant risk. 5 pairs of eyes focused on me, a mixture of wariness and desperate hope in their expressions. My son David launched his own financial advisory firm 3 years ago, I continued. Horizon Financial Partners. He's been asking me to join him since he started, but I was too loyal to Richard. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. David's built a solid foundation, but he's struggling to attract the high-value clients that would take his firm to the next level. "You're suggesting we all jump ship to your son's company?" James asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "I'm suggesting we bring our expertise, client relationships, and collective experience to a firm that would value those assets rather than view them as liabilities," I clarified. "David needs exactly what Richard is discarding: seasoned professionals with proven track records." "Our contracts have non-compete clauses," Meredith pointed out. "We're prohibited from soliciting Anderson clients for at least a year after termination." "Non-solicitation doesn't prevent clients from following us of their own accord," Raymond countered, the strategic mind that had made him a successful client acquisition specialist already working on solutions. "If they learn we've moved to a new firm and choose to transfer their business, that's their decision." Catherine leaned forward. "But would David's firm even have the capacity to absorb all of us? And the clients who might follow? That's a massive expansion overnight." It was a valid concern. Horizon Financial operated from a converted Victorian house in the historic district, with a staff of just 7 people. The infrastructure required to service Anderson's high-net-worth clients would be substantial. "That's part of the risk," I acknowledged. "But David has been planning for growth. He's been negotiating for additional office space in the building next door. And unlike Richard, he understands the value of institutional knowledge and established client relationships." "This sounds suspiciously like a coup," James said, but a small smile had begun to form at the corners of his mouth. "Not a coup," I corrected. "A regeneration. We build something new that preserves what was valuable in what we're being forced to leave behind." Diane, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "Before we get too far down this road, Eleanor, shouldn't you actually talk to David? Make sure he's open to this idea?" It was the practical question that only someone who had known me for 25 years would think to ask. In my rush to formulate a response to the day's events, I had skipped the crucial step of confirming my assumptions about my son's willingness to expand so dramatically. "You're right," I conceded. "I need to have that conversation first, but regardless of David's answer, we should be considering all our options. Richard has made his decision about our value. We don't have to accept his assessment." The meeting dispersed with a plan to reconnect the following day. As I gathered my personal items from my office, family photos, the Crystal Award from the Financial Advisors Association, the first dollar we had earned framed on my wall, I felt a strange mixture of grief and anticipation. 30 years of my professional identity was ending, but perhaps something even more authentic was about to begin. My condo felt emptier than usual that evening, the silence amplifying the magnitude of the day's events. I had purchased the downtown unit after my divorce 12 years earlier, attracted by its proximity to the office and low-maintenance lifestyle. Now, as I set my box of belongings on the kitchen counter, I wondered if the choices I had made had been worth the sacrifices. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was David. "Mom?" Diane called me. "What the hell happened today?" I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. "Richard decided I'm past my expiration date, along with anyone else over 50 who holds a key position." "That ungrateful bastard," David said, his anger palpable even through the phone. "After everything you've done for that company, for him personally?" "Apparently I lack the stamina for modern financial services," I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Marcus will be taking over my division on Monday." "Marcus? The guy who asked if municipal bonds were issued by the United Nations?" David's incredulity would have been amusing under different circumstances. "The very same. But it's not just about Marcus," Richard's nephew-in-law Bradley has apparently been positioned as the heir apparent. They're creating a family, dynasty, and clearing out anyone who might question their authority. David was quiet for a moment. Mom, I've been telling you for 3 years that you should leave that place, that you should come work with me. I know, I admitted, and I should have listened. But 30 years is a long time to invest in something. It's hard to walk away, even when you see the warning signs. Well, now they've forced the issue, David said, a new determination in his voice. So let's talk about what happens next. I want you at Horizon, not as a courtesy, not out of familial obligation, but because you're one of the best financial advisors in the state. I'd be an idiot not to snap you up the minute you became available. The simple vote of confidence, professional rather than personal, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. David, there's something else we need to discuss. I'm not the only one Richard is pushing out. I outlined the situation with my colleagues, their impending terminations, and the possibility of bringing them, and potentially some of their clients, to Horizon. As I spoke, I braced myself for hesitation or concern about such rapid expansion. Instead, David's response surprised me. I've been trying to figure out how to scale Horizon to the next level for the past year. The additional office space next door becomes available in 3 weeks. I've been saving capital specifically for a growth phase. If we could bring on established advisors with existing client relationships. His voice trailed off, then came back stronger. This could be exactly what Horizon needs to compete with the larger firms. You're serious? You'd be willing to take on all 5 of us? Not willing, Mom. Eager. Do you know how hard it is? To find financial professionals with genuine expertise who aren't already locked into the big firms? Richard just created a tremendous opportunity. For us, not for him. The enthusiasm in his voice was contagious. For the first time since walking into Richard's office that afternoon, I felt a surge of genuine optimism. There would be significant challenges, I cautioned, not wanting either of us to minimize the complexity of what we were considering. Integration of systems, client transitions, potential legal issues with non-compete clauses. All manageable with the right approach, David countered. The non-compete clauses at Anderson have never been tested in court, and Minnesota law tends to favor employee mobility. As for the rest, those are exactly the kinds of challenges a growing firm needs to navigate. As we continued to discuss logistics and possibilities, I found myself mentally reframing the day's events. What had begun as a devastating dismissal was transforming into an unexpected opening. A chance to build something aligned with my values rather than constantly accommodating an increasingly corporate culture. There's one more thing, David said before we ended the call. I know Richard's decision didn't just affect you professionally. I know how much of yourself you've invested in that company. The simple acknowledgement of the emotional impact, something Richard had completely overlooked, released the tightly controlled feelings I had been managing all day. It felt like being erased, I admitted, my voice catching slightly. Like 3 decades of contribution just didn't matter. It mattered, David said firmly, but maybe not to the people you thought it did. The real test of value isn't how people treat you when you're useful to them. It's what happens when they think you're not. The wisdom in his statement, from my son, who had once been the little boy I had rushed home to after late meetings and working weekends, struck me deeply. When did you get so insightful? I asked, a small smile forming despite everything. I had a good teacher, he replied simply. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning the next 30 years. As I ended the call, I looked at the box of belongings from my office, the tangible remnants of my time at Anderson Financial. They no longer seemed like artifacts of loss, but rather the foundation stones of something new. Richard had intended to end my career. Instead, He might have just liberated it. Horizon Financial Partners occupied a beautifully restored Victorian house on Summit Avenue, its brick exterior and gabled roof standing in dignified contrast to the glass and steel downtown. Towers that housed firms like Anderson Financial. I paused on the sidewalk the following morning, taking in the welcoming facade with its wraparound porch and carefully maintained gardens. This was nothing like the imposing corporate headquarters I had grown accustomed to over the past 17 years. Inside, the original architectural details had been preserved and integrated with modern office necessities. Crown moldings framed contemporary lighting fixtures. Vintage hardwood floors supported ergonomic office chairs. Meeting rooms featured smart boards mounted on walls still adorned with original wainscoting. The space struck a perfect balance between heritage and innovation, exactly what David had been trying to achieve with his firm's approach to financial services. "Mom!" David emerged from what appeared to be the main conference room, his face lighting up at the sight of me. At 36, he had his father's height and build, but my analytical mind and determination. His navy suit was impeccably tailored, but he wore no tie, a small rebellion against the strict corporate dress code I had adhered to for decades. "The place looks amazing," I said, genuinely impressed as he embraced me. "You've done wonderful work here." "Wait until you see the expansion space next door," he replied, guiding me through a hallway adorned with tasteful financial industry awards and framed client testimonials. "We've finally got approval to connect the buildings. Construction starts in 3 weeks." He pushed open a door that led to a covered walkway between the two buildings. The second Victorian house, slightly smaller than the main building but with similar architectural features, was being prepared for renovation. Through the windows, I could see exposed beams and partially demolished interior walls. "We'll have 7 additional offices, 2 more conference rooms, and a client welcome center," David explained, excitement evident in his voice. "The timing couldn't be better for what we're planning." The "we" wasn't lost on me. Despite my decades of experience, David was treating me as a partner in this venture, not an employee being rescued. "Speaking of which," he continued, leading me back to the main building, "I've called a leadership meeting for 9. My team is eager to discuss the possibilities." "And who exactly is on this leadership team?" I asked, curious about the firm he had built. "You'll see," he replied with a smile. "I think you'll be pleasantly surprised." The conference room featured a large oval table rather than the rectangular boardroom setup I was accustomed to at Anderson. 7 people were already seated, engaged in animated conversation that paused as we entered. I recognized a few faces immediately. "Eleanor!" Michael Chen rose from his chair, extending his hand. He had been a promising junior analyst at Anderson before leaving 5 years earlier, when Richard had passed him over for promotion in favor of a less experienced but well-connected external hire. "It's wonderful to see you again." "Michael," I smiled, genuinely pleased. "David didn't mention you were part of Horizon." "Lead investment strategist," he said with evident pride. David had the good sense to recognize talent when Anderson didn't. "And he's not the only Anderson exile here," added a familiar voice from across the table. Rebecca Winters had been our top-performing retirement specialist until her abrupt departure 3 years ago. The official story had been pursuing other opportunities, but office gossip suggested a confrontation with Richard over reduced benefits for long-term clients. As David made formal introductions around the table, a pattern emerged. Of the 7 leadership team members, 4 were former Anderson employees who had left under various circumstances, all related to Richard's shifting priorities and preference for younger, less expensive talent. The remaining 3 came from diverse financial backgrounds but shared a common philosophy about client service and long-term relationship building. "I think we can dispense with the usual meeting formalities." David began once we were all seated. "Most of you already know why we're here. My mother, along with several other senior professionals at Anderson Financial, is being pushed out as part of what appears to be a significant restructuring. Family takeover is more accurate, I clarified. Richard's nephew-in-law Bradley, Carson, is being positioned as the heir apparent, and key positions are being filled with people connected to the Carson family. Rebecca shook her head in disgust. Classic Richard. He always talked about meritocracy when it suited him, but family connections trumped performance every time. Their loss could be our gain, David continued. We've been discussing expansion strategies for months. The additional space next door was phase 1, but we've struggled with how to attract the high-value clients and institutional accounts that would take Horizon to the next level. Michael nodded in agreement. Our current client base is solid, but predominantly middle market. We need the expertise and relationships that would open doors to larger portfolios. Which is exactly what Eleanor and her colleagues represent, David said, gesturing toward me. Collectively, they manage over $2 billion in assets at Anderson, with client relationships averaging 15 years or more. They bring specialized knowledge in tax services, estate planning, client acquisition, and investment analysis that would take us years to develop internally. The excitement in the room was palpable, but Lisa Reynolds, Horizon's operations director, raised a practical concern. The timing for the additional space is perfect, but what about systems integration? Staff support? Compliance infrastructure for higher net worth clients? We'd need to scale up practically overnight. Those are legitimate concerns, I acknowledged, and precisely why I wanted this meeting before proceeding further with my colleagues. This would be a significant transformation for Horizon. Everyone needs to be on board. David pulled up a presentation on the conference room screen. I've been preparing for this possibility, not specifically with Anderson senior staff, but with an acquisition or merger in mind. These projections show the capital requirements, technology investments, and staffing needs for a growth phase of this magnitude. The financial models were thorough and realistic, accounting for a transition period with elevated expenses before new revenue streams stabilized. David had clearly inherited my attention to detail and Raymond's strategic foresight. The most immediate challenge would be client transition, Michael pointed out. Non-compete agreements would prevent direct solicitation. But they can't prevent clients from following their advisors once they learn where you've gone, Rebecca countered. Especially long-term clients with strong personal relationships. Exactly, I agreed. And while we must be scrupulously careful about legal boundaries, there's nothing preventing existing Horizon clients from referring their friends and colleagues who might currently be with Anderson. We could also accelerate our marketing strategy for the sectors Anderson has historically dominated, suggested Horizon's marketing director, Jordan Williams. Not targeting specific clients, but increasing our visibility in those spaces precisely when Anderson is experiencing leadership transitions. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, addressing everything from office space allocation to compensation structures, technology requirements to compliance procedures. Throughout it all, I found myself increasingly impressed by the team David had assembled and the culture he had cultivated. They were thorough without being rigid, ambitious without being cutthroat, respectful of experience while embracing innovation. I think we've covered the major logistical considerations, David concluded. But before we make any final decisions, I want to address the elephant in the room. He looked directly at me. Mom, if we do this, you and I will be working together. As equals. That brings its own set of challenges. The room fell silent. It was the question I had been considering since our phone conversation the previous evening. Could a mother and son successfully navigate a professional partnership without family dynamics complicating business decisions? It's a valid concern, I acknowledged, one I've thought about extensively since yesterday. And? David prompted. And I believe we can make it work precisely because we're both aware of the potential pitfalls, I replied. We've always respected each other professionally. You sought my advice when you founded Horizon, but ultimately made your own decisions. I criticized Anderson's direction for years, but you never said, "I told you so," when I was finally forced to admit you were right. David smiled at this acknowledgement. Besides, I continued, this partnership isn't just about us. It's about creating an alternative to the Anderson model, a firm that values experience alongside innovation, that prioritizes client outcomes over quarterly metrics, that builds for the long term rather than the next bonus cycle. The mission statement formed naturally as I spoke, crystallizing the vision that had been taking shape since my dismissal. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. That's exactly why we all left Anderson in the first place, Michael said. And why we joined Horizon instead of larger firms that would have paid more, added Rebecca. David stood, signaling a shift in the meeting's energy. Then let's make this official. I propose we move forward with the expansion plan, extending partnership offers to Eleanor and her colleagues, with a formal announcement once the details are finalized. All in favor? The vote was unanimous. As the meeting adjourned and the team dispersed to their various responsibilities, David lingered behind with me in the conference room. So, he said, a hint of boyish uncertainty crossing his features, are you in? Really in? The question reminded me of him at 12 years old, asking if I would really attend his science fair despite an important client meeting scheduled for the same day. I had rearranged my entire schedule then to keep my promise to him. Now, he was offering me the chance to rebuild my professional life on my own terms. I'm in, I confirmed. But my colleagues need to make their own decisions. This transition will be more complex for some of them than others. Then call them, David suggested, checking his watch. In fact, invite them here for lunch. I want them to see Horizon for themselves, to meet the team, to understand what we're building. The suggestion was perfect, far better than trying. To describe Horizon's culture and potential in a conference room at some neutral location. I'll reach out to them now, I agreed. As David left to make arrangements for the impromptu lunch meeting, I took a moment to absorb the significance of what was happening. Just 24 hours earlier, I had been devastated by the abrupt end to my 30-year career at Anderson Financial. Now I was standing in the conference room of what could become the region's next significant wealth management firm, helping to shape its future direction. Richard had been wrong. My age wasn't a liability. It was my greatest asset. The decades of experience, the deep client relationships, the hard-won wisdom from both successes and failures, these were precisely what would enable Horizon to compete with established firms. What Richard viewed as obsolescence, David recognized as invaluable foundation. I sent a group text to my former colleagues. Lunch at Horizon Financial today at noon. Come see what could be next. Address to follow. The responses came quickly, each affirmative, each exhibiting the same mixture of caution and hope that I had felt upon first hearing David's proposal. We were all at the same crossroads, facing the end of one professional chapter and the potential beginning of another. The difference was that we were approaching this transition together, drawing strength from our collective experience and shared values. As I looked around the warm, inviting space of Horizon Financial, so different from the cold corporate environment I had left behind, I realized that Richard's dismissal hadn't diminished me. It had liberated me. For 30 years, I had helped build someone else's vision. Now I had the opportunity to help shape something that truly reflected my own professional values. It wasn't just a new beginning. It was the right beginning, one that honored the past while embracing the future. The Victorian house's dining room had been converted into a casual meeting space that retained its original character. Crown molding, a crystal chandelier, and built-in china cabinets now housing financial reference materials rather than fine porcelain. David had arranged for a catered lunch to be set up on the ornate sideboard, creating an atmosphere more reminiscent of a dinner party than a business meeting. When Diane, James, Meredith, Raymond, and Catherine arrived precisely at noon, their reactions to Horizon's offices were similar to mine. There was visible surprise at the warm, inviting environment, followed by undisguised curiosity about how such a space functioned as a professional financial services firm. "Not what you expected?" David asked as he welcomed them, correctly reading their expressions. "It's certainly not Anderson Financial," Catherine remarked, taking in the blend of historic architecture and modern office functionality. "That's precisely the point," David replied with a smile. "We're building something deliberately different here. Let me show you around before lunch." The tour of Horizon's offices revealed a thoughtfully designed workspace that prioritized both client comfort and staff productivity. Meeting rooms were equipped with state-of-the-art technology but furnished with comfortable seating and natural materials. Workstations featured ergonomic setups with dual monitors and standing desk options. The kitchen and break area was bright and welcoming, with a professional coffee station and healthy snacks available. "You've created something special here," Meredith observed as we gathered in the dining room for lunch. "It feels both professional and human." "That was exactly our intention," David confirmed. "We want clients to feel they're being welcomed into a space where serious financial planning happens, but not in the intimidating, sterile environment of traditional firms." As we settled around the table, David's leadership team joined us, creating a natural integration of the two groups. The conversation flowed easily from introductions to professional backgrounds to shared industry experiences. The former Anderson employees among Horizon's team shared their own transition stories, offering honest assessments of both the challenges and benefits they had experienced. "The first 3 months were the hardest," Michael admitted to Raymond. "Building new systems, establishing new routines, stepping into greater responsibility than I'd had at Anderson. But by month 6, I couldn't imagine going back to the corporate structure." "The client relationships became more genuine," Rebecca added, addressing Meredith and Catherine. "Without the constant pressure to push proprietary products or hit arbitrary growth metrics, I could truly focus on what each client needed. My satisfaction scores have never been higher." As lunch concluded, David guided us to the conference room where I had met with his team earlier that morning. The expansion plans were displayed on the smartboard, providing a visual representation of the growth potential. My former colleagues studied the layouts with professional interest, mentally placing themselves in the new offices, visualizing the future David was proposing. "Let me be direct," David began once everyone was seated. "What happened at Anderson is unconscionable but increasingly common in our industry. Experienced professionals being pushed aside for younger, less expensive talent or family connections. Institutional knowledge being devalued in favor of superficial indicators like advanced degrees from prestigious schools or proficiency with the latest analytics software." Heads nodded around the table, the shared experience creating an immediate bond. "But this trend also creates an opportunity," David continued. "While firms like Anderson focus on image and quarterly metrics, firms like Horizon can prioritize what truly matters in financial services: trust, relationship depth, and consistent long-term outcomes for clients." "That sounds admirable," James said carefully. "But the reality is that larger firms have advantages in terms of resources, systems, and market visibility. How does Horizon compete without losing its soul in the process?" It was the question at the heart of our collective anxiety. Could there be a viable alternative to the corporate model we had all been part of for so long? "By growing deliberately rather than reactively," David answered. "By expanding our capacity and capabilities without compromising our core values. By leveraging the exact strengths that Anderson is discarding: deep client relationships, specialized expertise, and the wisdom that only comes from genuine experience." He outlined the expansion strategy in greater detail, describing how each person's specific expertise would enhance Horizon's service offerings. James's tax specialization would allow the firm to bring complex tax planning in-house, rather than referring to external partners. Meredith's estate planning credentials would open new opportunities with high-net-worth families. Raymond's client acquisition approach would complement their existing marketing strategy. Catherine's investment analysis skills would strengthen their portfolio management capabilities. And Diane's operational experience would be invaluable as they scaled systems and processes. "And where do I fit in this structure?" I asked, deliberately positioning myself as one of the group rather than leveraging my maternal connection to David. "As partner and senior advisor," David replied, without hesitation, "with particular focus on our institutional relationships and family office services, areas where your reputation in the industry would open doors that would otherwise remain closed to a firm our size." The titles and roles he proposed carried genuine authority and responsibility, not ceremonial positions designed to flatter, but substantive leadership roles that would shape Horizon's future direction. "This all sounds promising," Raymond said, the strategic thinker as always. "But let's address the elephant in the room: compensation. Anderson's package is generous, but primarily because they're paying for our silence and cooperation. What can Horizon offer financially?" It was a direct question that cut to the practical heart of the decision we were all facing. David didn't appear offended by the bluntness. "We can't match Anderson's cash compensation immediately," he acknowledged, "but we can offer something potentially more valuable: equity partnership." The proposal he outlined was both generous and thoughtful. Each senior advisor would receive an ownership stake in Horizon Financial Partners, with additional equity vesting over a 3-year period. Base salaries would be competitive but below Anderson's levels initially, with performance-based bonuses tied to both individual client retention and overall firm growth. "In essence," David explained, "we're asking you to bet on yourselves, on your ability to bring your expertise and client relationships to a new platform and help it grow. If we succeed together, your equity will be worth significantly more than what Anderson is offering in severance." Catherine, ever the analyst, leaned forward. "May I see the financial projections?" David passed tablets around the table, each loaded with detailed spreadsheets showing Horizon's current financial position, growth trajectory, and forecasted valuation under various scenarios. The numbers were solid, conservative in their base assumptions, but showing substantial upside potential if key growth metrics were achieved. As my former colleagues studied the projections, I observed their expressions. There was cautious optimism from James and Raymond, thoughtful consideration from Meredith, and intense focus from Catherine as she ran the numbers. Diane, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "This is more than a financial decision," she said, looking around the table. "We're not just choosing between compensation packages. We're deciding what the next chapter of our professional lives will look like. Will we allow ourselves to be discarded with a golden handshake? Or will we prove that our value extends far beyond what Richard Anderson calculated?" Her words crystallized the deeper meaning of the choice before us. This wasn't simply about finding new employment. It was about reclaiming our professional identity on our own terms. "There's something else to consider," Michael added. "If you stay at Anderson through your termination period, you'll be training your replacements, watching them dismantle what you've built, knowing the clients you've served will likely receive inferior guidance. Is that really how you want to spend the next few months?" The question struck a chord, particularly with Meredith, who had developed specialized estate planning protocols for Anderson's clients over 2 decades. "They've already asked me to document my client approach for continuity purposes," she said bitterly. "They want my intellectual property without me." "That's exactly what happened to me," Rebecca confirmed. 3 months of knowledge transfer that felt like giving away everything I'd developed over 15 years. The conversation continued, moving from financial considerations to practical logistics to emotional impacts. David and his team answered questions honestly, acknowledging the challenges of the transition while emphasizing the opportunities it presented. As the discussion progressed, I noticed a subtle shift in energy, from the shock and defensiveness that had characterized our initial meeting after my termination to a growing sense of possibility and even excitement. Raymond was the first to make a definitive statement. "I'm in," he declared, setting down the tablet with the financial projections. Anderson's approach to client acquisition has been moving in a direction I fundamentally disagree with for years. Mass digitization, algorithmic targeting, prioritizing volume over quality relationships. I'd rather build something I believe in than spend my remaining professional years implementing strategies I know are inferior. Catherine nodded in agreement. The numbers work. Not immediately, but the 3-year projection is solid. And frankly, at 57, I'm more interested in building something sustainable than maximizing short-term income. One by one, each of my former colleagues expressed commitment to the transition, each finding their own compelling reason to join Horizon, rather than accept Anderson's severance package and face an uncertain job market. "When would this happen?" James asked, always focused on practical implementation. "The transition timing, I mean." David leaned forward, energy radiating from his expression. "Ideally, as soon as possible. The construction on the expansion..."
Space begins in 8 weeks. We could temporarily house, but
in different situations. "That's where strategy comes in," David replied. "Eleanor's immediate departure creates an opening. If you each submit resignations immediately after your termination meetings, citing the leadership changes as your reason, it creates a pattern that will be noticed. A mass exodus of senior talent following my mother's departure tells a story that potential clients will understand without any improper solicitation on our part." Raymond nodded appreciatively at the strategic approach. "And the timing aligns perfectly with your expansion announcement. The industry will connect the dots without us having to draw the lines explicitly." "Exactly," David confirmed. "We'll issue a press release about Horizon's expansion and the addition of several senior industry leaders without naming names until each of you has formally separated from Anderson. We'll establish a clear timeline for each person's transition that respects legal obligations while maximizing the impact of the collective move." As the meeting continued into the afternoon, the conversation shifted from whether to join Horizon to how to execute the transition most effectively. My former colleagues, now future partners, began to engage with the possibilities before them, contributing ideas for service offerings, client transition approaches, and operational integration. I watched with growing pride as David facilitated this discussion, drawing out each person's expertise, acknowledging concerns without dismissing them, building consensus rather than imposing decisions. The leadership style I had tried to embody at Anderson, before Richard's increasing focus on hierarchy and control had marginalized such approaches, was flourishing here in my son's firm. When the meeting finally concluded, there was a palpable sense of purpose in the room. What had begun as a desperate response to unexpected termination had transformed into a deliberate choice to build something better than what we were leaving behind. As my former colleagues departed with handshakes and tentative smiles, the first genuine smiles I had seen from any of them since the restructuring announcement, David and I remained in the conference room. "That went better than I expected," he admitted, loosening his tie as he leaned back in his chair. "I thought there would be more hesitation." "They're not just running away from Anderson," I observed. "They're running towards something they've wanted for years, a chance to practice their profession according to their values, not just corporate metrics." David nodded thoughtfully. "You know this won't be easy. There will be legal challenges, logistical nightmares, personality conflicts. Building something worthwhile never is smooth. No, I agreed. But for the first time in years, the challenges will be in service of something we believe in, not just shareholder value or executive bonuses. My son smiled, the same determined smile he had shown as a child facing a difficult math problem or as a teenager learning to drive in Minnesota winter conditions. Then let's get to work. We have a firm to rebuild. As we walked through Horizon's offices, now quiet in the late afternoon light, I felt a surge of gratitude alongside the determination. Richard's dismissal had been meant to end my career, to relegate me to an early retirement I neither wanted nor needed. Instead, it had become the catalyst for the most exciting professional chapter I could imagine, creating a legacy that extended far beyond what I could have achieved at Anderson Financial. Sometimes I reflected, the worst moments in our lives create the openings for the best ones, but only if we have the courage to walk through those newly opened doors. News traveled quickly through Minneapolis's financial community. By Wednesday morning, just 3 days after my termination, the industry was buzzing with speculations about the sudden departure of Anderson Financial's longest-serving division director, followed by resignation announcements from 5 other senior leaders. I was finalizing arrangements in my new office at Horizon when David appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, his expression a mixture of amusement and vindication. "You might want to see this," he said, handing me the device. On screen was the Minneapolis Business Journal's financial sector newsletter, featuring a prominent headline, "Exodus at Anderson Financial. Senior talent departs amid restructuring." The article was remarkably detailed, citing sources familiar with the situation, who described a leadership purge designed to position Richard Anderson's nephew-in-law for eventual succession. The reporter had even obtained a quote from Marcus Davis, my replacement, who somewhat defensively stated that fresh perspectives are essential in today's rapidly evolving financial landscape, adding that, while we value the contributions of departing team members, Anderson Financial is focused on the future, not the past. The dismissive comment about the past revealed how thoroughly Marcus had absorbed Richard's perspective on experienced professionals. It also perfectly illustrated the mindset we were positioning Horizon to counter. "Have you seen the comments section?" David asked, scrolling down to reveal a lively discussion among industry professionals. Many expressed shock at Anderson's approach, with several noting the collective experience being lost. Over 120 years of combined financial expertise. "The industry is watching," David observed. "This creates the perfect opening for our announcement. Next week." The timing couldn't have been better planned if we had orchestrated it ourselves. Horizon had scheduled a press event for the following Monday to announce its expansion, including the acquisition of the adjacent building and the addition of distinguished industry leaders to its team. The news of Anderson's exodus created a natural lead-in to our story without requiring any direct reference to the situation. "Richard must be furious about this coverage," I remarked, returning the tablet. "He hates any hint of internal discord becoming public." "According to my sources, furious doesn't begin to cover it," David confirmed. "Apparently he called an emergency executive meeting yesterday afternoon after James and Meredith submitted their resignations within an hour of each other." "And the clients?" I asked, my thoughts turning to the relationships I had cultivated over decades, people whose financial security and family legacies had been entrusted to my guidance. "Already calling. We've had 17 inquiries since yesterday from Anderson clients who heard rumors about your departure. Lisa has been taking their information and explaining that you'll be able to reach out once your transition to Horizon is formally announced." This was the delicate dance required by non-solicitation agreements. We couldn't directly contact Anderson clients, but nothing prevented them from contacting us once they learned of our move through public announcements or industry channels. "What about the Hammond portfolio?" I asked, referring to one of Anderson's largest institutional clients, a family foundation with assets exceeding $300 million. I had personally managed their investments for over 15 years, guiding them through market turbulence and helping fund their expanding philanthropic initiatives. David's expression turned serious. That's a bit more complicated. Richard has personally taken over their account management for now. He's scheduled a meeting with the foundation board for Friday. This news was concerning. The Hammond Foundation had specific investment parameters aligned with their mission, prioritizing social impact alongside financial returns, maintaining certain ethical exclusions, and balancing liquidity needs with long-term growth. Richard had always found these constraints irritating, preferring standardized approaches that maximized efficiency and profitability. He'll push them toward their model portfolios, I predicted. Streamlining, he'll call it, easier administration, reduced management fees. But it will undermine the alignment with their mission that we've spent years refining. Which creates another opportunity, David pointed out, not to solicit, but to be prepared when they inevitably reach out. Our strategic discussion was interrupted by Diane, who appeared at the office door with an expression that immediately commanded attention. "You need to see this," she said, setting her laptop on my desk and turning it toward us. On screen was an email from Bradley Carson, Richard's nephew-in-law, addressed to all Anderson financial staff. The subject line read, "Organizational Announcement, Strategic Realignment." The message itself was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, filled with phrases like optimizing operational efficiency, streamlining decision-making processes, and aligning talent deployment with strategic objectives. Buried within the jargon was the real message. Departments were being consolidated, reporting structures flattened, and certain legacy processes reevaluated to ensure compatibility with our forward-focused approach. "He's dismantling everything we built," Diane said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The specialized service teams, the customized portfolio structures, the relationship-centered account management model, all being replaced with standardized processes and centralized decision-making." David studied the email with professional interest. This actually works in our favor. The more they move toward standardization, the more opportunity we have to differentiate with personalized service and tailored solutions. "But what about the clients?" I asked, genuinely concerned for the individuals and families whose financial futures were now in less experienced hands. Some of these relationships go back decades. They've entrusted Anderson with their retirement, security, their children's education funding, their legacy planning. "That's exactly why this approach will ultimately fail," David replied. "Finance isn't just numbers. It's trust, relationship, and deep understanding of each client's unique situation. You can't standardize that. But in the meantime, real people may suffer real consequences from inferior guidance," I insisted. Diane closed her laptop with a decisive click. "Then we need to be ready to provide an alternative, not by soliciting, but by being prepared, to serve when they come looking for the expertise they've lost." This perspective, viewing our Horizon venture not just as a professional rebirth for ourselves, but as a necessary service for clients who might otherwise receive inadequate guidance, added moral weight to our efforts. We weren't just salvaging our own careers. We were preserving a client-centered approach to wealth management that was increasingly rare in an industry dominated by automation, standardization, and cost-cutting. The conversation was interrupted by Lisa, Horizon's operations director, who appeared with an expression of controlled urgency. "I've just received a rather interesting call," she said. "Westlake Capital is apparently reaching out to everyone who's recently left Anderson. Their CEO would like to arrange a meeting with all of you as soon as possible." Westlake Capital was Anderson's primary competitor, a larger, more traditional firm with a reputation for aggressive recruitment and competitive tactics. Their interest in Anderson's departing talent was predictable, but potentially concerning. "What exactly Did they say, David asked, his tone cautious, that they've been watching the situation at Anderson with interest and believe there could be mutual benefit in discussion? Lisa replied. They specifically mentioned significant signing bonuses and accelerated partnership tracks for senior advisors with established client relationships. The implication was clear. Westlake saw an opportunity to not only acquire experienced talent, but also potentially capture Anderson clients in the process. They're trying to block our play, Raymond observed, having joined us in time to hear Lisa's report. If we scatter to different firms rather than consolidating at Horizon, the impact is diluted. No clear alternative emerges for displaced clients. It was a shrewd assessment. Richard would still face the embarrassment of losing senior talent, but if that talent dispersed across multiple competitors rather than uniting in a single, visible alternative, the narrative would shift from exodus to normal industry movement. So what do we do? Diane asked. Ignore the outreach entirely? No, I said after a moment's consideration. We meet with them. David raised an eyebrow in surprise. You want to consider Westlake's offer? I want to understand exactly what they're offering and why, I clarified. Information is leverage. If Westlake is concerned enough about our collective move to make a preemptive offer, that confirms the market values what we represent. It strengthens our negotiating position with potential clients and partners. Raymond nodded appreciatively. And it signals to Richard that there are multiple suitors for the talent he discarded. Nothing motivates like the fear of assets moving to a direct competitor. Arrange the meeting, David instructed Lisa. But make it clear we're meeting. As a courtesy, not out of active interest. And schedule it for after our press announcement on Monday. This sequencing was strategic. By the time we met with Westlake, our affiliation with Horizon would be public knowledge, changing the dynamic from recruitment to potential partnership or acquisition discussion. As Lisa departed to make the arrangements, Catherine appeared with news of her own. Marcus just called me, she announced. Apparently, several key clients are questioning the changes at Anderson and specifically asking about my departure. He's offering to delay my transition by 3 months with a significant retention bonus if I'll help stabilize these relationships. The desperation inherent in this outreach was revealing. Barely a week into the reorganization, cracks were already appearing in Richard's plan. Clients were questioning the changes, seeking reassurance from the advisors they trusted, rather than accepting the corporate line about fresh perspectives and forward-focused approaches. What did you tell him? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Catherine's smile held a hint of satisfaction. That I appreciated the offer but had already accepted another position that better aligned with my professional values and client service philosophy. His reaction? Raymond inquired. Shock initially, Catherine replied. Then a rather transparent attempt to discover where I was going. When I declined to share that information until the appropriate time, he suggested that smaller firms often lack the resources and stability that clients expect from their financial partners. We all recognize the talking point. It was classic Anderson rhetoric when competing against boutique firms like Horizon, emphasizing size and longevity, while glossing over the personalized service and flexibility that smaller firms could offer. He's already developing the counter-narrative, David observed, positioning any alternative as inherently inferior due to scale rather than quality. Which gives us another key messaging point for Monday's announcement, Raymond noted. We need to directly address the size equals stability myth and reframe the conversation around service quality, relationship continuity, and alignment of interests through our partnership structure. The strategic discussion continued through the afternoon, each new development from Anderson informing our approach to Horizon's public launch. Rather than simply reacting to events, we were incorporating them into our planning, transforming potential obstacles into strategic advantages. By Friday, the pattern had become clear. Anderson was struggling to contain both client concerns and internal anxiety following the departure of so many senior leaders. Richard had been forced to personally step in with several key accounts, taking time away from the strategic initiatives he had prioritized. Marcus was floundering in his new role, making rookie mistakes that experienced clients immediately recognized. And Bradley Carson, the supposed heir apparent, was generating resistance with his aggressive restructuring proposals. Meanwhile, at Horizon, our preparation was proceeding with remarkable efficiency. Temporary workstations had been established for each new team member. System integration was underway, with client management software being configured to accommodate the anticipated expansion. The architectural plans for the connected buildings had been finalized, with construction set to begin the following week. Most importantly, the team was coalescing around a shared vision, not just former Anderson colleagues finding refuge, but experienced professionals deliberately choosing to build something that reflected their values and prioritized genuine client service over corporate metrics. On Sunday evening, the night before our public announcement, David invited the entire expanded team to his home for dinner. The gathering had the feeling of both a celebration and a strategy session, a moment to acknowledge what we had already accomplished while preparing for the challenges ahead. As conversations flowed around the table, I found myself seated next to James, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the evening. "Second thoughts?" I asked gently. He considered the question carefully before responding. "Not about leaving Anderson. That decision feels more right with each passing day. But about whether we can truly create something different." He gestured toward the animated discussions happening around us. "Right now, we're united by what we're leaving behind. But building something sustainable requires more than shared grievances." It was a legitimate concern, one that had occurred to me as well. Rebellion energy could launch a venture, but wouldn't sustain it through inevitable challenges. "Look more closely," I suggested. "Yes, there's relief at escaping Anderson's toxic environment. But there's also genuine excitement about what we're creating. Listen to Raymond and Jordan discussing client acquisition approaches that prioritize relationship fit over portfolio size. Or Meredith and Rebecca developing the multi-generational planning service that Richard always dismissed as inefficient. And this isn't just reaction, it's creation. James studied the interactions with newfound attention, his expression softening as he observed the authentic engagement and shared purpose evident in each conversation cluster. "You might be right," he acknowledged. "There's something happening here that goes beyond professional survival." "Exactly," I agreed. "We're not just finding new jobs. We're reclaiming our professional identity, our belief that financial services, at its best, is about helping real people achieve security, fulfillment, and legacy. That's what Richard lost sight of, and what we have the opportunity to embody." As David called for attention to offer a toast, the collective energy in the room crystallized into a moment of shared purpose. We stood together, former competitors, now colleagues, experienced professionals once deemed obsolete, now recognized as essential, individuals who had separately faced dismissal, now united in creation. "To new beginnings," David said, raising his glass. "And to the wisdom of building on proven foundations rather than discarding them." The sentiment captured perfectly what made our venture different from Richard's approach. Not blind adherence to tradition for tradition's sake, nor reckless pursuit of novelty for its own sake, but thoughtful integration of proven wisdom with genuine innovation. As we clinked glasses and shared smiles, I felt a certainty that had been missing in my professional life for years. Richard's dismissal, intended to end my career, had instead become the catalyst for its most meaningful chapter. Sometimes, I reflected, the best response to rejection isn't argument or anger, but creation. Building something so undeniably valuable that the rejection itself is revealed as the true failure of vision. Tomorrow, we would announce that creation to the world. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that often follows major decisions. The Horizon financial offices buzzed with focused energy as final preparations were made for the press conference scheduled for 10 a.m. The local business media had been invited, along with industry analysts and selected community leaders. The narrative had been carefully crafted, not as an attack on Anderson Financial, but as a positive announcement about Horizon's expansion and commitment to client-centered wealth management. I was reviewing my talking points in the conference room when Michael appeared at the door, his expression unusually troubled. "Eleanor, you need to see this," he said, placing a document folder on the table. "One of my former clients at Anderson forwarded it to me this morning. It's the revised investment policy for the Westridge Community Foundation." The Westridge Foundation was a significant nonprofit organization focused on affordable housing initiatives across the Midwest. With an endowment of approximately $180 million, it had been an important institutional client at Anderson for over a decade. I had personally structured their investment approach to balance consistent grant-making capability with long-term capital preservation, carefully integrating their mission into their portfolio construction. "What am I looking at?" I asked, opening the folder to review the document. "The changes Marcus and Bradley have implemented since taking over the account," Michael explained. "They've eliminated the social impact investment allocation entirely, redirected funds from sustainable infrastructure to higher-yield corporate debt, and removed all the ESG screening criteria we had established." As I studied the revisions, the implications became clear. The new investment policy prioritized maximum return generation without regard for the mission alignment we had carefully constructed. The Foundation's portfolio would now potentially include investments in industries directly contrary to their affordable housing mission, including predatory lending operations and developers known for opposing affordable housing initiatives. "This completely undermines their approach," I said, genuine concern in my voice. "The board specifically wanted investments that complemented their mission, not just generated returns. These changes fundamentally alter the relationship between their capital and their purpose." "Exactly," Michael agreed. "But that's not the worst part. According to my contact, these changes were presented as administrative updates that didn't require board approval. Most board members aren't investment professionals. They're community leaders and housing advocates. They may not understand the full implications until it's too late." The situation presented a clear ethical dilemma. We possessed information that would be vital to the Foundation's board making fully informed decisions about their endowment management. Yet directly reaching out could be interpreted as client solicitation, potentially violating non-compete agreements and exposing Horizon to legal challenges just as we were launching our expanded firm. "We should discuss this with the team," I decided, gathering the documents. "This isn't just a business decision. It's an ethical one that affects an organization doing important work in our community." Within 30 minutes, we had assembled the key leaders in the conference room. David listened carefully as Michael and I outlined the situation, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Let me make sure I understand correctly," he said when we finished. "Anderson has fundamentally altered the investment approach. For a major foundation without full board awareness or explicit approval, potentially undermining their mission in the process. And we're now faced with deciding whether to alert them to these changes, knowing that doing so could be interpreted as client solicitation." "That's the essence of it," I confirmed. "The changes themselves aren't illegal, just deeply inconsistent with the Foundation's stated values and previous investment policy. But the board deserves to know what's happening with their endowment." Raymond, ever the strategist, leaned forward. "The timing couldn't be worse from a business perspective. Any contact with Anderson clients right now would give Richard ammunition to claim we're violating non-solicitation agreements. He could potentially seek an injunction that would disrupt our launch momentum." "But if we stay silent," Meredith countered, We're essentially allowing a community foundation to be misled about how their capital is being deployed. That violates everything we claim to stand for as advisors." The room fell silent as we collectively weighed the competing imperatives: legal caution versus ethical obligation, business strategy versus professional integrity. Catherine was the first to break the silence. "What if there's a middle path, one that fulfills our ethical obligation without directly engaging in solicitation?" "I'm listening," David said, his attention focused on her suggestion. "The foundation has an annual public board meeting next week," Catherine explained. "Their investment policy and performance are always on the agenda. What if someone attended as a community member and asked appropriately targeted questions during the public comment period, not identifying themselves as former Anderson advisors or current Horizon partners, just concerned citizens with financial expertise?" The approach was clever, technically avoiding direct solicitation while still ensuring the board received the information needed to make informed decisions. "It's a gray area legally," Diane observed. "Not clearly prohibited, but still potentially risky." "Everything worthwhile involves risk," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my tone. "The question isn't whether there's risk, but whether the potential benefit justifies it." David studied me for a moment, recognizing the shift in my perspective. At Anderson, I had been known for careful adherence to compliance guidelines, sometimes frustrating colleagues with my insistence on following rules to the letter. Now I was arguing for a course of action that, while ethically sound, pushed legal boundaries. "This is bigger than business competition," I continued. "The Westridge Foundation funds housing initiatives that serve thousands of vulnerable people across 5 states. If their endowment is compromised by inappropriate investments or excessive risk-taking, real people will suffer real consequences." James nodded in agreement. "And isn't that precisely the problem with the direction Richard has taken Anderson? Prioritizing technical compliance and profit maximization over actual client welfare? If we follow the same calculus now, just with our own firm's interests in mind, how are we any different?" His question cut to the heart of what we were attempting to build at Horizon, not just another financial services firm with different personnel, but a fundamentally different approach to wealth management. One that placed client interests and societal impact alongside business success, rather than subordinate to it. "There's another consideration," Raymond added. "How we handle this situation sets a precedent for how Horizon will approach ethical dilemmas in the future. Our decision now becomes part of our firm's character." David absorbed these perspectives, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he looked up at the group. "I believe we need to act on this information, but in a way that maintains both legal compliance and ethical integrity. Catherine's suggestion of attendance at the public board meeting is a good start. Additionally, we should prepare a general educational document about investment policy alignment with organizational mission, not specific to Westridge, but addressing the principles at stake. We could release it as part of our thought leadership content following today's announcement," Jordan suggested. "Position Horizon as advocates for mission-aligned investing without targeting specific organizations. That creates appropriate context for any questions raised at the public meeting," Raymond observed. "It establishes that these concerns are part of our professional philosophy, not just a competitive tactic." The solution wasn't perfect, but it balanced competing obligations in a way that honored our values while acknowledging practical constraints. As the discussion concluded and we prepared to return to launch preparations, David asked me to remain behind for a moment. "This situation highlights something important," he said once we were alone. "The real difference between Horizon and Anderson isn't just about who employs which advisors. It's about how we define success and what we're willing to sacrifice to achieve it." "I've been thinking the same thing," I admitted. "For years, I told myself that Richard's focus on growth and profitability was just a different approach to the same ultimate goal, serving clients well. But these Westridge changes reveal something more fundamental. He's willing to compromise client interests for business efficiency in ways I simply can't accept. Which means our success can't be measured solely by how many clients follow us or how quickly our assets under management grow, David continued. It has to include how well we maintain the values that prompted this transition in the first place. This perspective, defining success in terms of values maintained rather than just metrics achieved, resonated deeply. Throughout my career, I had measured professional accomplishment through conventional indicators: portfolio performance, client acquisition, revenue generation. Now, facing this ethical crossroads, I recognized that true success would require a more nuanced evaluation. I spent 30 years helping build Anderson into what I thought was a client-centered institution, I reflected. Watching Richard dismantle that in service of short-term gains and family nepotism has been painful, but perhaps necessary. Necessary? David questioned. To clarify what matters most, I explained. Sometimes we need to see our values violated to understand how deeply we hold them. Richard's actions forced all of us, to decide what kind of financial professionals we truly want to be. David nodded, understanding dawning in his expression. Not just competent technicians who execute transactions efficiently, but trusted advisors who genuinely prioritize client welfare over institutional convenience. Exactly. And that clarity is worth something, even with all the disruption that came with it. Our conversation was interrupted by Lisa, who appeared at the door with an update on press attendance for the announcement. The practical demands of the day reasserted themselves, but the ethical clarity we had achieved would inform not just how we handled the Westridge situation, but how we built Horizon's culture moving forward. As I joined the team gathering for final preparations before the press conference, I observed my former colleagues with fresh appreciation. Each had faced the same decision I had: accept the generous severance package and retreat, or take a EI, risk on building something that better reflected their professional values. Each had chosen the more difficult but potentially more rewarding path. The press conference itself exceeded our expectations. The room was filled beyond capacity, with reporters from every major business publication in the region, plus several national financial news outlets. David opened with an overview of Horizon's growth trajectory and expansion plans, then introduced each new partner with a brief highlight of their specialized expertise. When my turn came, I spoke not about my 30 years at Anderson or the circumstances of my departure, but about the opportunity to build a wealth management approach that integrated deep experience with innovative methods. True innovation in financial services isn't about discarding proven wisdom, I stated, my voice steady with conviction. It's about thoughtfully evolving that wisdom to address changing client needs and market conditions. The message resonated, generating approving nods from the assembled journalists. It positioned Horizon not as a refuge for displaced advisors, but as a deliberate integration of experience and innovation, exactly the narrative we had hoped to establish. Following the formal presentation, journalists engaged us individually, seeking more specific details about our plans and perspectives. A reporter from the Financial Advisor magazine approached me with particular interest. Ms. Thompson, your departure from Anderson after 30 years has created significant industry buzz, she began. Off the record, was age discrimination a factor in the restructuring that led to your exit? The question was direct, offering an opportunity to publicly criticize Richard and Anderson's practices. The temptation to set the record straight was strong, but taking that path would reduce our story to a personal grievance rather than a positive creation. What matters isn't why experienced professionals left Anderson, I replied carefully. What matters is what we're building at Horizon, a firm that values proven wisdom, client-centered approaches, and genuine alignment between advisor success and client outcomes. That's the story worth telling. The reporter studied me for a moment, then smiled with unexpected appreciation. "That's a much more interesting angle than the one I came looking for," she admitted. "Mind if I quote you on that?" As the press conference concluded and the last journalist departed, the team gathered in the main conference room to assess the impact. Initial coverage was appearing online already, with headlines emphasizing Horizon's expansion and the unprecedented concentration of industry talent joining the firm. "Phase 1 successful," David declared, satisfaction evident in his tone. "Now comes the real work, delivering on the promise we've just made to the market." Raymond raised his water glass in an impromptu toast, to promises worth keeping. As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a surge of purpose stronger than anything I had experienced in my final years at Anderson. Richard had intended my dismissal to be an ending, the conclusion of a career he deemed past its prime. Instead, it had become a beginning, the launch of a venture that might actually achieve what Anderson had originally aspired to be before. Profit maximization and family politics had corrupted its mission. The ethical dilemma we had faced regarding the Westridge Foundation had clarified something essential. Our collective departure from Anderson wasn't just about finding new professional homes for ourselves. It was about preserving and extending an approach to financial guidance that placed client welfare at its center, an approach increasingly rare in an industry dominated by standardization and cost-cutting. That clarification transformed what might have been merely a business transition into something more meaningful, a recommitment to the values that had drawn each of us to financial services in the first place. Not just the creation of a new firm, but the reclamation of a purpose. The day after our press conference, the Horizon offices buzzed with purposeful activity. The media coverage had exceeded our expectations, generating inquiries from potential clients, investment partners, and even prospective employees. What had begun as a defensive response to our collective dismissal from Anderson was rapidly evolving into a significant market opportunity. David called a strategic planning meeting to harness this momentum. The expanded leadership team gathered in the main conference room, where the walls now displayed architectural renderings of the connected buildings alongside the firm's revised organizational structure. "We have a narrow window of opportunity," David began, standing at the head of the table. "The publicity from our announcement has created awareness, but we need to convert that awareness into tangible business results before the news cycle moves on." Raymond nodded in agreement. "The next 30 days are critical. Right now, we're the interesting news story in the regional financial community. By next month, we'll be expected to demonstrate that we're more than just refugees from Anderson. So how do we make the most of this moment?" David asked, opening the floor for strategic input. Catherine took the lead, her analytical mind already processing the possibilities. "We need to clearly articulate our differentiation beyond just having experienced advisors. What specifically will Horizon offer that clients can't get at Anderson or other established firms?" It was the essential question, one that would define not just our marketing approach, but the fundamental structure of our service offerings and business model. "Personalization at scale," I suggested, the concept crystallizing as I spoke. Anderson is moving toward standardization to maximize operational efficiency. Most larger firms follow the same model, fitting clients into predetermined service tiers and product categories. We can offer truly customized wealth management without sacrificing the sophistication of our solutions. James built on this foundation, and we can integrate services that are typically fragmented, tax planning that genuinely informs investment, strategy, estate planning that shapes portfolio construction, philanthropic advising that aligns with both financial goals and personal values. The integrated advisory team, Meredith added, warming to the concept. Instead of passing clients between specialists who rarely communicate effectively with each other, we create collaborative teams that address the full financial picture. As ideas flowed around the table, a compelling service model emerged. One that leveraged our collective expertise while addressing specific pain points we had observed during our years at Anderson and other large firms. The approach wasn't revolutionary in concept, but it was surprisingly rare in execution, particularly for clients below the ultra-high net worth threshold. David captured the key elements on the conference room's smartboard, organizing them into a coherent structure that would guide our service development. "This gives us our strategic foundation," he said as the discussion reached a natural conclusion. "Now we need to address tactical implementation. How do we operationalize this? Vision quickly enough to capitalize on our current visibility?" This question shifted us from theoretical strategy to practical execution, the challenging work of transforming compelling ideas into functioning systems and processes. "We start with the client experience mapping," Lisa suggested. "Documenting every touchpoint from initial contact through ongoing relationship management, ensuring each interaction reflects our integrated approach." "And we need to rethink our technology stack," Michael added. "Most industry platforms are designed around siloed specialties, separate systems for investments, planning, client relationship management. We'll need customized integration to support our collaborative model." The conversation continued, delving into the specific requirements of our ambitious vision. The challenges were substantial: technology limitations, regulatory considerations, talent acquisition, physical space constraints, while the building expansion was underway. But with each potential obstacle identified, the team proposed creative solutions drawn from our collective experience. Throughout the discussion, I observed the emerging dynamic with growing appreciation. This wasn't the hierarchical decision-making I had grown accustomed to at Anderson, where ideas flowed downward from executive leadership with minimal input from those responsible for implementation. Instead, Horizon's approach was genuinely collaborative, drawing on diverse perspectives to create more robust strategies and more effective execution plans. By mid-afternoon, we had developed a comprehensive 90-day implementation roadmap with clear responsibilities assigned and accountability mechanisms established. The energy in the room remained high despite the long hours of concentrated work, each person engaged and invested in the outcome. As the meeting was wrapping up, Michael's phone buzzed with an incoming message. His expression shifted as he read it, prompting immediate attention from the group. "What is it?" David asked, sensing the significance. "A contact at Westridge Foundation," Michael replied, looking up from his phone. "Their board meeting was moved up to tomorrow morning. Apparently, there's an emergency agenda item to approve a significant portfolio reallocation. Exactly the changes we were concerned about." The accelerated timeline created new urgency around the ethical dilemma we had discussed the previous day. If the board approved the revised investment policy without understanding its implications, the foundation's mission alignment would be compromised before any educational intervention could take place. "This changes the calculation," Raymond observed. "Waiting for the public meeting is no longer viable if decisions are being made tomorrow." "But direct outreach still carries legal risk," Diane cautioned, "especially with the heightened attention on our movement from Anderson to Horizon." The room fell silent as we collectively weighed the competing imperatives. Finally, I spoke, my decision crystallizing with unexpected clarity. "I'll reach out to Sophia Williams," I said firmly. "As board chair, she should be aware of the implications before tomorrow's vote." "Eleanor," David cautioned, "that's a direct contact with an Anderson client. Richard would have grounds for legal action if he discovered it." "I understand the risk," I acknowledged, "but my relationship with Sophia predates Anderson entirely. We served on the Urban Housing Commission together 15 years ago. I can approach her as a longtime colleague in the affordable housing space, not as a financial advisor soliciting business." The distinction was meaningful, but wouldn't completely eliminate the legal exposure. Everyone in the room understood the potential consequences, not just for me personally, but for Horizon's launch momentum. "Are you certain?" David asked, concern evident in his expression. I nodded, conviction growing stronger as I considered the alternatives. Some things matter more than business advantage or legal caution. The Westridge Foundation serves vulnerable populations across 5 states. Their investment policy shouldn't be fundamentally altered without full board understanding and explicit approval. "What exactly would you communicate?" Raymond asked, his strategic mind already assessing how to minimize risk while achieving the essential objective. "Just the facts about the proposed changes and their potential impact on mission alignment," I replied. "No mention of Horizon, no suggestion that they should move their account, no criticism of Anderson beyond the specific investment policy revisions." James nodded approvingly. "Educational content, not solicitation. That's defensible, even if not completely risk-free." "And the right thing to do," Meredith added quietly. David studied me for a moment, then addressed the room. "This decision belongs to Eleanor. The potential legal exposure affects her most directly, so the choice must be hers." He turned back to me. "Whatever you decide, Horizon will support you completely." His willingness to respect my autonomy in this matter, to treat me as a true partner rather than an employee requiring permission, reinforced my confidence in our new venture. This was the kind of organizational culture we were building, one where values-based decisions were supported even when they carried business risk. "I appreciate that," I replied, "and I've made my decision. I'll contact Sophia this evening, focusing solely on ensuring the board has complete information before tomorrow's vote." With that matter resolved, the meeting concluded, each person departing with clear assignments for implementing our strategic vision. I remained behind to prepare for my conversation with Sophia, carefully drafting talking points that would convey the essential information without crossing into inappropriate solicitation. As I worked, David returned to the conference room, closing the door behind him. "I wanted to check in," he said, taking a seat across from me. "This can't be an easy decision after 30 years of careful compliance with every regulatory guideline." His perception was accurate. Throughout my career, I had been known for exceptional adherence to both the letter and spirit of industry regulations, sometimes frustrating colleagues with my insistence on following rules that others treated as flexible guidelines. "It's not easy," I acknowledged. "But I keep coming back to the same question. What's the purpose of all these regulations in the first place? They're designed to protect clients and preserve market integrity. If following them technically while allowing client harm contradicts their fundamental purpose, something is wrong with the application." David nodded thoughtfully. "The difference between true compliance and performative compliance." "Exactly," I agreed, appreciating his quick grasp of the distinction. "Anderson has become expert at performative compliance, checking every regulatory box while simultaneously finding ways to prioritize firm profitability over client interests. I don't want to build that kind of culture at Horizon." "Nor do I," David affirmed. "Which is why I support your decision, despite the potential complications it might create. It establishes precedent for how we'll handle similar situations in the future." His understanding validated the instinct that had led me to this decision, the recognition that our new firm's character would be defined not by our marketing materials or mission statements, but by the actual choices we made when values and expediency came into conflict. Later that evening, from my home office, I made the call to Sophia Williams. Our conversation was brief but substantive, focusing exclusively on the investment policy changes scheduled for board approval and their potential impact on the Foundation's mission alignment. As promised, I made no mention of Horizon, offered no criticism of Anderson beyond the specific policy revisions, and suggested no alternative service providers. Sophia listened carefully, asked several clarifying questions, and thanked me for the information. "This is precisely why investment policy governance matters," she said before ending the call. "The board needs to understand exactly what we're approving, not just defer to financial experts using terminology designed to obscure rather than illuminate." I slept more soundly that night than I had since my termination from Anderson. The weight of unaddressed ethical concern lifted from my conscience. Whatever legal or professional consequences might result from my action, I had honored the deeper commitment that had guided my entire career, placing client welfare above institutional convenience or personal advantage. The following morning, I arrived at Horizon to find an email from Sophia in my inbox. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." The message itself was brief but meaningful. "Eleanor, the board voted unanimously to table the investment policy revisions pending a comprehensive review by our newly formed investment policy committee. Your insights provided exactly the context needed for informed governance. The foundation and the communities we serve are in your debt. Regardless of institutional affiliations, true professionals place mission integrity first. Sophia." I forwarded the message to David without additional comment. His response came within minutes. "This is why we're building Horizon, not just for ourselves, but for the people and purposes our clients serve." The exchange captured something essential about our collective journey from Anderson to Horizon. What had begun as a response to professional rejection was evolving into something more meaningful, the creation of a wealth management approach genuinely aligned with the purposes our client's capital was intended to serve. As the day progressed and we continued implementing our strategic plan, I found myself reflecting on how Richard's dismissal, intended to clear space for younger, more malleable talent, had instead created the opening for something he hadn't anticipated, a legitimate alternative to the increasingly transactional approach he was imposing at Anderson. Sometimes rejection creates precisely the conditions needed for authentic creation. What appears as an ending becomes the catalyst for a more aligned beginning, and what seems like professional failure reveals itself as the necessary disruption that precedes more meaningful success. By forcing us out, Richard had inadvertently liberated us to build something better than what we were leaving behind. Not just a different firm, but a different model for how financial guidance could serve both clients and the larger community. The strategic plan we were now implementing wasn't just about business growth or competitive positioning. It was about preserving and extending an approach to wealth management that prioritized genuine impact alongside financial return. That realization transformed what might have been merely a career transition into something more significant. A recommitment to the values that had drawn each of us to financial services in the first place, now freed from the institutional constraints that had increasingly compromised their expression. The third week after our public launch brought the first significant challenges to Horizon's ambitious growth plan. I arrived at the office early Monday morning to find David already in the conference room, surrounded by spreadsheets and financial projections, his expression more serious than I had seen since our venture began. "Good morning," I said, setting down my coffee and taking a seat across from him. "You're here early." He looked up, tension evident in his posture. The construction estimates for the building expansion came in. They're nearly 40% higher than our initial projections. I reached for the detailed breakdown he slid across the table. The numbers told a concerning story. Supply chain issues affecting material costs, labor shortages driving up wages, and unexpected structural remediation required in the historic building. The beautiful Victorian that had seemed like the perfect physical manifestation of our blended traditional innovative approach was now presenting a significant financial hurdle. "This changes our capital allocation model considerably," I observed, quickly calculating the implications. "We were counting on completing the expansion before onboarding clients beyond a certain threshold." "Exactly," David confirmed. "We have 3 institutional prospects ready to transition their accounts as soon as we demonstrate adequate infrastructure." Without the expanded space and additional meeting rooms, we can't properly service accounts of that size. The timing couldn't have been worse. Our media coverage had generated substantial interest from potential clients, including several major accounts that would significantly accelerate our growth trajectory. But wealth management, particularly at the institutional level, required more than just financial expertise. It demanded appropriate physical facilities for confidential discussions, team meetings, and client presentations. "What options have you identified?" I asked, shifting immediately to solution mode rather than dwelling on the problem. "3 possibilities, each with significant drawbacks," David replied, pulling up a document on his tablet. "First, we could proceed with the expansion as planned, but that would require accessing our contingency capital much earlier than anticipated, leaving us vulnerable if other unexpected expenses arise. Second, we could scale back the renovation, focusing only on the essential client-facing spaces, but that would constrain our growth potential as staff expands. Third, we could explore alternative locations for immediate expansion while completing the Victorian renovation on a longer timeline. Each option involved difficult trade-offs between immediate needs and long-term vision, financial prudence, and growth opportunity. It was exactly the kind of complex decision that tests a new partnership's resilience and decision-making process. "We should bring this to the full leadership team," I suggested. "This impacts everyone's areas of responsibility." David nodded in agreement, his expression lightening slightly. "I've scheduled an emergency meeting for 9. I appreciate the perspective. At Anderson, I'd have expected this decision to be made in isolation by whoever had the highest title." "One of many differences we're building into Horizon's culture," I replied with a smile. "Collaborative decision-making almost always produces better outcomes, even if it takes longer." The leadership team gathered promptly at 9, each member quickly grasping the significance of the construction challenge. The discussion that followed was both rigorous and creative, examining the 3 options David had outlined while generating additional alternatives. "What about temporary expansion?" Meredith suggested. "There's a business center 3 blocks away with short-term executive suite leases. Not ideal for permanent operations, but it could bridge the gap while we complete the renovation on a more realistic timeline." Catherine built on this idea. "We could also explore a hybrid approach, accelerate the renovation of the most essential client-facing spaces while using temporary facilities for back-office functions. That would optimize the client experience while managing capital constraints." Raymond approached the challenge from a different angle. "What if we reframe this entirely? Instead of viewing our physical space limitations as a constraint, could we turn it into a differentiator? Many firms are moving toward digital-first client engagement with reduced physical footprint. We could position our approach as relationship-centered, but digitally enhanced, leveraging technology to extend our reach while maintaining the personal connection that distinguishes our service model." The brainstorming continued, each perspective contributing valuable insights informed by decades of collective experience. I watched with growing appreciation as the team worked through the problem methodically, evaluating options against both practical constraints and our core values. "There's another factor we should consider," James added as the discussion approached its conclusion. "The construction delay might actually provide breathing room to refine our service model before scaling too quickly. Growing too fast without fully established systems has derailed many promising firms. This constraint might be a blessing in disguise." His observation resonated with me immediately. Throughout my career, I had witnessed numerous instances where rapid expansion outpaced operational readiness, creating service inconsistencies that damaged client relationships and firm reputation. Perhaps this unexpected obstacle was forcing a more sustainable pace than our initial enthusiasm might have pursued. After thorough deliberation, we reached consensus on a hybrid approach. We would proceed with a phased renovation of the Victorian building, prioritizing essential client-facing spaces while leasing temporary facilities nearby for administrative functions. This would preserve our capital reserves while still enabling us to service the institutional clients prepared to transition their accounts. As the team dispersed to implement this modified plan, David remained behind with me in the conference room. "That was impressive," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. Everyone contributed meaningful insights, no one got defensive about their departmental interests, and we reached a better solution than any of the original options. It's what happens when you bring together experienced professionals who share core values, I replied. We've all lived through enough organizational challenges to recognize that integrated solutions usually outperform siloed approaches. Our conversation was interrupted by Lisa, who appeared at the door with an expression that immediately commanded attention. "I hate to add another challenge to an already complicated morning," she said, "but you both need to see this." She handed David a printed email with the Anderson Financial logo prominently displayed in the header. It was addressed to all Anderson clients and signed by Richard Anderson himself. The subject line read, "Important information regarding recent staff changes." The message itself was masterfully crafted corporate damage control, acknowledging the departure of several long-term employees while emphasizing Anderson's continued commitment to service excellence and enhanced capabilities through our next-generation leadership team. What made the communication particularly concerning was the carefully worded paragraph near the end. "You may be contacted by former Anderson advisors who have joined a small local firm with limited resources and capabilities. While we respect everyone's career choices, we want to assure you that Anderson Financial continues to offer the comprehensive services, institutional stability, and sophisticated solutions that have served your financial needs for decades. We strongly encourage you to contact us directly with any questions about your accounts or services." The implication was clear. Richard was attempting to preemptively discredit Horizon by emphasizing its size and newness relative to Anderson's established presence. "He's framing the narrative before clients even hear from us," David observed, concern evident in his tone. "Positioning any outreach as potentially disruptive rather than offering a legitimate alternative." "And he specifically emphasized the size differential," I noted, playing on the common misconception that larger necessarily means better or more stable in financial services. Lisa, whose operational expertise included client communications, immediately identified the strategic implications. "This changes our outreach sequencing. We need to address these implied concerns directly, rather than assuming clients will evaluate us solely on our team's expertise." She was right. Richard's message had created a framing challenge we would need to overcome in all client communications. Regardless of how impressed potential clients might be with our collective experience and service model, the small firm with limited resources narrative would now be a hurdle requiring explicit address. "So how do we counter this effectively?" David asked, looking between us for strategic guidance. The question hung in the air for a moment as we considered our options. Simply responding with defensive assertions about our capabilities would likely reinforce, rather than dispel the concerns Richard had planted. We needed a more sophisticated approach. "We reframed the entire comparison," I suggested, the strategy forming as I spoke. "Not as large versus small, but as standardized versus personalized. Not as established versus new, but as institutional versus client-centered. We turn Anderson's size from an implied advantage into a potential limitation." Lisa nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly right. We develop messaging that highlights how our structure enables customization that larger firms can't provide. How our direct engagement of senior advisors contrasts with the delegation to junior staff that's common at institutions like Anderson. And we emphasize that while Horizon itself is newly expanded, the team leading it brings over 150 years of combined wealth management experience," David added. "We're not a startup. We're a deliberate evolution of proven wealth management, Principles. What had initially seemed like a significant setback was transforming through our collective analysis into a clarifying moment, one that would sharpen our messaging and strengthen our market positioning. Richard's attempt to undermine our credibility was inadvertently helping us articulate our differentiation more precisely. As we continued developing our strategic response, another unexpected challenge emerged. Meredith returned from a client meeting with troubling information. Anderson had suddenly revised its non-compete enforcement stance, sending legal notices to several former employees who had recently left for other firms. While non-compete agreements were common in the industry, they were rarely aggressively enforced except in cases of client solicitation or proprietary information misuse. Richard is signaling his willingness to use legal intimidation, Raymond observed when we reconvened to discuss this development. Even if the cases are ultimately indefensible, they create immediate pressure through legal costs and professional uncertainty. The threat of potential litigation added another layer of complexity to our already challenging week. While we had been scrupulously careful to avoid direct solicitation of Anderson clients, the ambiguity inherent in non-compete language created vulnerability that Richard appeared prepared to exploit. We need legal counsel, David decided. Not just general advice, but a specific strategy for navigating this situation. Richard is clearly willing to use aggressive tactics to impede our momentum. Within hours, we had engaged Patricia Hernandez, a highly regarded attorney specializing in employment law and non-compete disputes in the financial services industry. Her initial assessment was cautiously optimistic. Minnesota courts generally favor employee mobility, she explained during our conference call. While non-compete agreements are enforceable under certain circumstances, they must be reasonable in scope and necessary to protect legitimate business interests. Anderson's agreements, based on what you've shared, contain several provisions that are likely overreaching. Her expertise provided some reassurance, but the prospect of legal battles, even ultimately winnable ones, threatened to divert attention and resources from our core mission of building Horizon's service capabilities. It was a distraction we could ill afford during this critical launch phase. As the day progressed, bringing additional challenges with each hour, I noticed something remarkable about our fledgling team's response. Rather than becoming demoralized or fragmented by these obstacles, people seemed to draw closer together, bringing increased focus and creativity to each problem. The construction delays, Richard's preemptive client communication, and the legal threats were being met not with discouragement but with collaborative determination. During a brief break between crisis management meetings, I found myself standing with David near the window overlooking the garden behind the Victorian house. The autumn air had turned cool, with leaves beginning to show hints of gold and crimson, nature's own transition in progress. Not exactly the smooth launch month we envisioned, David remarked, a rueful smile softening the observation. No, I agreed, but perhaps more valuable in the long run. He raised an eyebrow, inviting elaboration. Think about it, I continued. We're being forced to clarify our priorities, strengthen our messaging, and solidify our team cohesion much faster than might have happened during an unchallenged growth period. These obstacles are actually accelerating our development as an organization. David considered this perspective, his expression thoughtful. Like pressure forming diamonds? Something like that, I nodded, though I'd prefer slightly less pressure. We shared a moment of quiet laughter, a brief respite in a day filled with intensity. Then David's expression grew more serious. I've been meaning to ask, how are you doing with all of this? Not just the current challenges, but the entire transition. This isn't how you expected to be spending your professional time at this stage of your career. The question caught me slightly off guard. In the whirlwind of activities following my termination from Anderson, I had focused almost exclusively on strategic and practical matters, giving little attention to my personal feelings about this unexpected life change. It's been illuminating, I replied after a moment's reflection. For 30 years, I defined myself largely through my role at Anderson. I was Eleanor Thompson, Senior Division Director, the steady presence who helped navigate market turbulence and organizational transitions. Now I'm helping build something new, with all the uncertainty and vulnerability that entails. Regrets? David asked, watching me carefully. I smiled, surprising myself with the immediacy and certainty of my response. Not one. Despite all these challenges, or perhaps because of them, I feel more professionally alive than I have in years. At Anderson, I was maintaining something that was slowly drifting away from its original purpose. Here, I'm creating something that genuinely reflects my values. The realization struck me with unexpected force. Richard's dismissal, intended to push me toward retirement and irrelevance, had instead catalyzed the most energizing professional chapter of my life. By attempting to define me as too old for meaningful contribution, he had inadvertently freed me to demonstrate just how valuable seasoned expertise could be when liberated from corporate constraints. As we returned to the conference room to continue addressing the day's challenges, I carried this revelation with me. The understanding that obstacles often reveal paths that would otherwise remain undiscovered, and that endings frequently contain within them the seeds of more authentic beginnings. Our first significant obstacles were teaching us not just about resilience, but about the true nature of the firm we were building, one that would measure success not by the absence of challenges, but by how we responded to them collectively. The solution to our most pressing challenges emerged from an unexpected direction. 1 month into Horizon's launch, we had made significant progress despite the obstacles, developing our service model, refining our messaging, and advancing the phased renovation plan. Yet the space constraints remained a critical limitation as client interest continued to exceed our capacity. I was reviewing potential temporary office options when Sophia Williams, the Westridge Foundation board chair I had contacted regarding their investment policy changes, requested a meeting. She specified that she wanted to discuss community development opportunities rather than foundation investments, carefully respecting the boundaries of our prior interaction. We met at a small cafe equidistant from our respective offices, the neutral location maintaining appropriate separation between my guidance on the investment policy matter and any potential business relationship. "Thank you for making time," Sophia began once we were seated with coffee. "The Foundation Board wanted me to express our appreciation for your insights regarding the policy revisions. Your intervention prevented changes that would have fundamentally undermined our mission. Alignment. I'm glad I could help," I replied, careful to maintain focus on the educational aspect of our previous interaction. Investment policy governance is complex, particularly for mission-driven organizations. Sophia nodded, then shifted to a different topic. "I understand Horizon is expanding rapidly. How is your facility planning progressing?" The question seemed innocuous enough, though I wondered about her specific interest in our physical space challenges. "We're exploring options," answered carefully. "The renovation of our Victorian headquarters is proceeding, but construction costs have necessitated a phased approach that extends our timeline." "That's actually why I wanted to speak with you," Sophia said, her expression brightening. "The Westridge Foundation recently acquired the Harmon Building as part of our Community Revitalization Initiative. It's a beautiful historic structure just 3 blocks from your current location, and we're seeking the right anchor tenant to establish the building's character before we develop the remaining spaces for community organizations." The Harmon Building was a downtown landmark, a meticulously restored 1920s office building with the kind of architectural character that perfectly complemented Horizon's blend of tradition and innovation. Its location in the heart of the financial district would provide both convenience and visibility that our current site, while charming, couldn't match. "That's an intriguing possibility," I acknowledged, immediately seeing the potential alignment. "What exactly are you proposing?" A partnership rather than a typical landlord-tenant relationship, Sophia explained. Westridge would offer below market lease terms for the main floor and second level, approximately 12,000 square feet of prime space. In exchange, Horizon would commit to providing pro bono financial advising services to the community organizations that will occupy the building's upper floors. The proposal was unexpected and potentially transformative. The space would more than accommodate our current needs and near-term growth projections, while the location would enhance our market visibility substantially. The pro bono commitment aligned perfectly with the community-focused values we were building into Horizon's culture. "This sounds promising," I replied, careful not to overcommit before consulting with the team. "I'd need to discuss it with our leadership group, of course, but I can see significant potential alignment with our vision." "Wonderful," Sophia smiled. "I should mention that there's some time sensitivity to this opportunity. The foundation board meets next week to finalize partnerships for the building. If Horizon is interested, we would need a preliminary commitment by Monday." The accelerated timeline created both opportunity and challenge. Moving quickly could secure an ideal facility solution at favorable terms, but rushing such a significant decision risked overlooking important considerations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.